Lonely CEO stopped his car in the rain. A soaked girl knocked and said, "Please, my child is sick." Rain pounded against the windshield, drumming a steady rhythm that filled the silence inside Tobias Kane's black sedan. New York blurred behind the storm, its lights flickering like ghosts in the downpour. Tobias sat motionless behind the wheel, his face unreadable. He had just left another late-night board meeting, another round of numbers and expansion plans, none of which mattered to him anymore, if anything ever had. At 32, he was one of the city's youngest and most respected CEOs. Yet outside the boardroom, Tobias lived alone in a penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home. No pictures, no warmth. Just marble, glass, and silence. 15 years had passed since his sister Lila died, but her absence clung to him like fog, silent and constant. She had been the only light in his life, and when she was gone, so was something inside him. He didn't let people in after that. Not really. Not ever. His reflection in the glass revealed the same man the world saw. Black hair perfectly combed back, sharp jawline, dark tailored suit, expression cold and clean. They called him the man made of stone. Tobias didn't argue. As the rain thickened, he drove through one of the city's poorer neighborhoods, a place he rarely passed through, let alone stopped in. His driver was off that night, and Tobias had taken the wheel himself, hoping the storm might drown out the unease inside him. It didn't. Near St. Mary's Public Hospital, the light turned red. That was when he saw her. A woman appeared through the sheets of rain, running, soaked to the skin, clutching something close to her chest. Tobias barely noticed her at first, until she stumbled into the street, right in front of his car. He slammed the brakes. The tires screeched, the car jerked to a halt. She turned toward him. Her golden hair clung to her face, water streaming down her cheeks. In her arms was a little girl, maybe 3, limp and burning with fever. The woman rushed to his window and knocked, her hand trembling. "Please, my child is sick. I have no one else." Tobias stared at her, his hand still on the wheel. His instinct was to look away, to lock the doors, to pretend he didn't hear. He wasn't the man people ran to for help. He didn't do rescue. Not anymore. But then, he saw her eyes, blue-gray, wide with desperation. And in that moment, the world tilted. They were Lila's eyes. The same eyes that had begged him to stay 15 years ago. On that winter night he had left her alone to fetch help. When he returned, it was too late. His throat tightened. He exhaled slowly, fighting the ache rising inside him. Without a word, Tobias unlocked the door. "Get in," he said quietly. The woman hesitated for a second, then climbed in, holding her child close. Rainwater pooled at her feet. Tobias glanced down and froze. Her feet were bare. No shoes, no socks, only bruised, red skin pressed against the rubber mat of his luxury car. Her toes were shaking violently from the cold. Something inside him cracked open. He swallowed hard, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he remembered another night, snow falling instead of rain, Lila's voice calling after him, her bare feet running through the frost. He had found her hours later, her small body cold in his arms. The woman beside him whispered, "She's burning up. Please, help her." Tobias turned the car toward the hospital without speaking. He drove fast, the tires slicing through puddles, wipers beating furiously. When he reached the emergency entrance, nurses ran out to take the child. Tobias opened the door for her, helped her out, and for a moment their hands touched. Her skin was ice. As she hurried after the stretcher, Tobias removed his dark wool coat and draped it over her shoulders. She turned back in surprise, her lips parting as if to thank him, but he was already walking away. He stopped once at the edge of the parking lot, glancing back. The woman was holding his coat tightly around her and staring after him through the rain. Tobias whispered to himself, his voice barely audible beneath the storm. She didn't have shoes either, that night. Then he stepped into the darkness, the rain swallowing him whole. Tobias Kane sat alone in the kitchen of his penthouse, long after midnight, a half-empty glass of bourbon untouched on the marble counter. Rain still tapped softly against the windows, a quieter echo of the storm from earlier. But the silence inside his home was deafening. Sleep would not come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. The woman with golden hair plastered to her face, her arms wrapped tightly around that feverish little girl. The desperation in her voice, the way her bare feet had trembled against the floor of his car. Tobias had seen poverty before. He had driven past it, read about it, made decisions about it in conference rooms, high above it, but never had it climbed into his car. Never had it looked him in the eye with Lila's gaze. By morning, he had already made the call. Discreet, quiet, no names mentioned over the phone, just a favor to an old contact in the hospital's administration. "Find out who she is," he said. "The woman with the child. Last night. Emergency intake." The answer came quickly. Rena Holloway, 24 years old. Single mother. No medical insurance. Address listed as a temporary shelter on 9th Avenue. Tobias leaned back in his chair, fingers pressed together, staring at the name on the screen. He requested more. Background, history, anything available. Within an hour it arrived, along with a jolt to his chest that made him stop breathing for a moment. Rena had grown up in Brookwood Children's Home, an orphanage once funded entirely by the Kane Family Foundation. A decade ago, the funding had been pulled, the home had closed 6 months later, and it had been his signature that finalized the withdrawal. He remembered the document now, a thick report on cost reductions. He had been 22, newly promoted, eager to prove himself. The foundation had been losing money, they said. The board had proposed reallocating funds toward higher impact opportunities. The orphanage was listed on page 12, marked for immediate defunding. Tobias had signed it without reading past the first paragraph. Now, he stared at the screen, the weight of it crashing over him like a second storm. Rena Holloway had been 13 when the home closed. She had been forced out into foster care, then aged out at 18, aged into survival. And now, 10 years later, she was still fighting to keep a child alive, alone, soaked in the rain, barefoot in front of his car. He stood abruptly, pushing the chair back with a harsh scrape. Somewhere in this city, a woman he had unknowingly displaced was carrying the burden of his decisions, and he had left her at the hospital without even asking her name. Guilt was a cold thing. It crawled into his ribs and settled there. He pulled out his phone again. This time, he called his personal assistant. "Find out where she is staying now," he said, "but keep it off the books. No one else needs to know." As he ended the call, Tobias caught his reflection in the glass door. He looked the same as always, perfectly groomed, unshaken, unreadable. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. He turned away from the reflection, walked to the window, and looked down at the city far below. For the first time in years, Tobias Kane did not feel like the man made of stone. He felt like a man who had broken something, and could no longer pretend it was not his to fix. The pediatric ward of Street Mary's smelled faintly of disinfectant and exhaustion. Soft beeping monitors echoed down the sterile hallway, punctuated by the occasional cry of a child. Tobias walked quietly, hands in the pockets of his long coat, head slightly bowed. He had no appointment, no reason to be there, at least none he could explain to anyone. But something had pulled him back. Room 203. Through the small glass window in the door, he saw her again. Rena. She sat beside a hospital bed, her golden hair pulled into a messy knot. Her back was curved slightly forward, her chin resting on the edge of the mattress, one hand holding the tiny hand of the girl sleeping under thin white blankets. Ellie. The child's face was flushed but peaceful. A pale pink dress, slightly too big, peeked out from beneath the covers. A stuffed bunny rested beside her. Tobias stared through the glass, unmoving. Then, quietly, he turned and walked back down the hallway. Later that day, at the billing office, he signed the necessary papers. The hospital administrator raised an eyebrow when he refused to list his name as the donor. "No names," Tobias said calmly. "Just mark it paid in full." By evening, The hospital room buzzed with surprise. A nurse informed Rena that Ellie's treatments had been fully covered. Every test, every dose, every overnight stay. Rena froze. "Who?" she asked, her voice low. The nurse shrugged. "No one left a name." Rena stood in stunned silence, clutching Ellie's hand. Gratitude bloomed in her chest, but so did unease. Nothing in her life had ever come freely. A few days later, Rena and Ellie were discharged. The child had stabilized. Rena refused to go back to the shelter, not wanting to risk Ellie getting sick again. She bundled her daughter into a stroller and walked the streets instead. And Tobias followed. From a distance, he watched her day after day, always careful not to be seen. She had started selling small handmade items, knitted gloves, keychains, tiny bracelets, on a corner near the subway entrance. Her fingers moved quickly, skillfully, even when red from the cold. Ellie sat beside her in the stroller, wrapped in a blanket, clutching her bunny. What Tobias noticed most wasn't the poverty. It was the quiet resilience. But there was something else, something that pierced deeper. Rena was still barefoot. Each morning, she stepped onto the freezing pavement with nothing but the soles of her feet. Her heels were cracked, her toes raw. He saw her wince sometimes when she shifted her weight, but she never complained, never paused. Then came the day the temperature dropped. Bitter wind cut through the streets. Tobias pulled his coat tighter around himself as he watched from the other side of the road. Rena knelt beside Ellie, reaching into her tattered coat pocket. She pulled out a single sock, worn, stretched thin, a hole in the toe. She slipped it onto Ellie's foot, gently tucking it in. Then, wordlessly, she reached into a plastic shopping bag, pulled it open, and slid both her bare feet inside, tied the handles around her ankles. The thin plastic crinkled against the sidewalk. Tobias turned away sharply, heart twisting. He stepped behind a bus stop, leaned against the wall, and covered his face with one trembling hand. A tear slipped down his cheek. Hot, sudden, unwelcome. She had nothing, and still, she gave everything. He had everything, and had given nothing that mattered. Not yet. The pediatric clinic waiting room was crowded and noisy, full of coughing children, tired parents, and flickering fluorescent lights. Tobias stood near the entrance, feeling wildly out of place in his tailored coat and pressed slacks. Still, he waited. He had called ahead and learned that Ellie had a follow-up appointment that morning. He did not know exactly what he would say, only that he needed to see them again, not from across the street, not from behind glass, but face to face. And then, there she was. Rena walked in, holding Ellie's hand. Her golden hair was tied back in a loose braid, and she wore a thin jacket several sizes too big. Ellie clutched her stuffed bunny and gave a sleepy yawn. Tobias approached slowly, unsure if she would recognize him. "Hi," he said, voice low but steady. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I think we might have met once." Rena looked up at him, startled. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I used to volunteer at Brookwood," Tobias added quickly. "The children's home, a long time ago." Her expression softened, but only just. "I remember someone," she said cautiously. "Tall, quiet, always wore a tie even with a t-shirt." Tobias almost smiled. "That sounds like me." There was a silence between them. Rena's grip on Ellie's hand relaxed a little. "We're just waiting for her checkup," she said finally. "You can sit, if you want, but only for a minute." Tobias nodded and took the seat beside them. Ellie looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Are you a doctor?" "No," he said gently, "but I can make a paper crane. Want to see?" She nodded eagerly. Tobias pulled a small slip of paper from his pocket, always carried, though he had forgotten why, and began folding. His hands moved with surprising grace. "Like magic," Ellie whispered when he finished. "Exactly," he replied, setting the crane on her knee. "For good luck." Rena watched all of it in silence. Her eyes studied him, not quite trusting, not quite cold. When the nurse finally called their name, Tobias stood with them. "Would it be all right?" he asked. If we talked sometime? Maybe over coffee? Rena tilted her head. Why? I might be able to help you find work, he said. Something better than selling bracelets in the cold. She stiffened instantly. I don't want charity. It is not charity. It is opportunity. Her lips tightened. We are fine. I can see that you're trying, Tobias said carefully. But you should not have to do it alone. I am doing it alone, she said, her voice harder now. And that's the point. We survive, with or without help. She picked Ellie up, holding the girl against her hip. Tobias stepped back. I did not mean to offend you. You didn't offend me, she said. You just reminded me that people like you live in a different world. And with that, she turned and walked away. For the first time in a very long time, Tobias felt something strange, rejection. And not in the business sense. It was personal, direct, earned. He left the clinic without another word, her words echoing in his mind. Later that week, they met again, accidentally. It was raining. Again. Rena was leaving the hospital pharmacy, Ellie bundled in her arms. She saw him standing by the exit. You again, she said warily. I meant what I said, Tobias replied. I want to help. She stared at him, eyes darkening. Wait. Her gaze sharpened. Your name? Tobias. He said nothing. Her voice dropped, sharp as glass. Tobias Kane, Kane Foundation. The silence between them thickened. You're him, she said, the one who shut down Brookwood. Tobias looked down. It was a long time ago. I didn't. You didn't know, she cut in. That hundreds of kids were thrown into the system, that some of us ended up on the streets. I was young, he said, and stupid. I signed papers. I did not understand. But you did sign them, she said, voice shaking. You signed away our home. Ellie squirmed in her arms. I have to go, Rena whispered, eyes brimming. I don't want your money, and I don't want your guilt. She turned from him, walking quickly down the sidewalk, vanishing into the wet gray of the city. Tobias stood still, soaked, speechless, and for the first time, unsure if anything he had left to give could ever make it right. The penthouse was quiet, but not peaceful. It never was. Tobias stood in the middle of the living room, rainwater still dripping from his coat, his shoes tracking wet footprints across the hardwood floor. He did not bother to turn on the lights. The city outside blinked through the windows, casting shadows across the empty walls. He moved slowly toward the corner cabinet, an antique oak piece untouched for years. Inside, carefully preserved in a small wooden box, were the only things he had ever kept from his childhood. Letters, all from Lila. He sat down on the couch, placed the box on the coffee table, and opened it with fingers that trembled more than he expected. The paper had yellowed at the edges, but her handwriting was unmistakable, round, hopeful, and full of life. She had written him letters constantly during her last winter, even though they lived in the same house. It was her way of staying close while he buried himself in work and excuses. Tobias unfolded one of the letters and began to read. I miss when we used to race home from school. Remember how you always let me win? Another one. Mom says you're busy now, but I think you're just sad. You don't have to be. I'm still here. He swallowed hard, eyes stinging. Then, at the bottom of the stack, he found the last one. The letter she had never given him. He had found it in her room the night she died. He had read it only once before, 15 years ago, and never again. Until now. If one day you see someone like me, don't walk away. Don't make the same mistake twice. Don't try to fix it with money or silence. Just stay. Tobias closed his eyes. Rena's face came rushing back, her eyes, her voice, her pain. And Ellie, the child wrapped in pink, looking up at him like he was someone she could trust. He stood abruptly, heart pounding. He knew what he had to do. By noon the next day, Tobias was in the boardroom of Kane Holdings. He stood at the head of the long table, facing 12 men and women in suits more expensive than most people's rent. I am reinstating the Kane Family Foundation, he said clearly. Specifically, the Brookwood Children's Initiative. We will open new homes, fund healthcare and education, and support families like Rena Holloway's. A pause, silence, then murmurs, disbelief, disapproval. One board member finally spoke, leaning forward with a slight smirk. Tobias, this feels impulsive, not to mention unnecessary. We donate to larger causes already, global causes. Another added, do not take this personally, but your emotional attachment is clouding your judgment. This looks like a publicity stunt. It is not a stunt, Tobias said coldly. It is a correction, one I should have made 10 years ago. A third voice chimed in. And what happens when the media starts asking questions? About where these funds are going? About why now? Tobias met their eyes, one by one. Let them ask. Within days, word got out. The press latched on quickly. Kane CEO's sudden philanthropy, redemption or reputation move. From boardroom to Brooklyn, billionaires push to reopen defunct orphanage. And then the worst of it. Exposed. Kane's roll funding, cuts that displaced hundreds of children. The backlash was swift. Stocks dropped, investors panicked. Social media called him a fraud in tailored suits. And the final blow, his longtime executive assistant, someone he had trusted like family, leaked internal emails suggesting the move was planned solely to repair public image. Tobias sat alone in his office that night, the city lights flickering outside. His phone buzzed with messages from board members urging him to retract, to shift the narrative, to let PR handle it. He turned it off. Let them say what they wanted. He had walked away once. He would not do it again. The hospital room was colder this time, more sterile, more serious. Ellie lay curled in the same narrow bed, her little body shivering despite the layers of blankets tucked tightly around her. The soft pink dress she always wore had been replaced by a hospital gown 2 sizes too big. Her cheeks were pale now, her breathing faint. Rena sat by the bed, unmoving, fingers wrapped around Ellie's small hand. Fear had taken root in her chest days ago, and now sat heavy, unmoving. The doctor entered quietly, holding a chart. His expression was gentle, but grave. She's relapsed, he said, and this time it's worse. Rena's voice was barely audible. What's happening to her? We ran further tests, he explained. Ellie has a rare inherited blood disorder. Her bone marrow isn't producing enough healthy blood cells. That's why her immune system keeps crashing. Rena blinked hard. What does she need? A bone marrow transplant. And soon. We've already searched the National Registry, but we haven't found a full match. She inhaled shakily. Family? The doctor shook his head. A close relative is usually the best chance, but we know that's not an option in Ellie's case. The next best hope is an unrelated donor with a near-perfect HLA match. He paused. That's extremely rare, but not impossible. Tobias didn't hesitate. After a quiet conversation with one of the doctors he'd supported through the Kane Foundation years ago, he submitted a sample for testing, under a false name, through a private lab. He didn't want Rena to know. Not yet, not unless it mattered. When the results came back, even the lab technician had sounded surprised. 99.8% match, she said. That's statistically improbable, but real. You're the closest we've seen, even without a family link. Tobias stared at the screen. Numbers and markers meant little to him, but the result was clear. He was Ellie's best, and possibly only, chance. He waited until he was sure. Then he went to Rena. She was sitting on the bench outside the hospital, hunched forward, arms wrapped around herself. I matched, he said quietly. She looked up, eyes instantly guarded. What? I had myself tested. My HLA markers. I'm a 99.8% match. It's rare, but it's real. Rena stood slowly. Why would you do that? Because she needs someone, Tobias said. And I want to help. She shook her head. You don't even know her. I do, he said. I see her. Every time I close my eyes. That's not enough, Rena snapped. You think you can fix everything with your money, your guilt. This isn't guilt. His voice was firm now. This is responsibility. Not because I owe you. Not because I'm trying to redeem myself. But because I have a chance to save a life. And I'm not walking away from that again. Rena's voice cracked. I don't want her to live because someone pitied us. She won't, Tobias said gently. She'll live because someone chose to stay. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then, slowly, Rena's shoulders sank. Just promise me, she whispered. You're not doing this to feel better about yourself. I'm doing this, he said, because I didn't get to save my sister. And maybe, this time, I can do it right. The transplant was scheduled quickly. Bone marrow donation wasn't without risk. Tobias knew that. The doctors explained everything. Anesthesia, extraction, recovery time. He signed the consent forms without blinking. No press, no cameras, no announcement. The only thing he asked for was privacy and Ellie's safety. The procedure took several hours. There were minor complications during the extraction, more blood loss than expected, a drop in pressure, but Tobias pulled through, barely. When he woke up, pale and weak, the first thing he asked was, "Did she make it?" A nurse smiled and nodded. "She's strong," she said. "Just like you." In the pediatric ward, Ellie stirred beneath her blankets, color slowly returning to her cheeks. Beside her, Rena held a paper crane. It had been left anonymously at the foot of her bed. She knew who it was from. And this time she didn't try to stop the tears. Ellie blinked slowly as the morning light filtered through the blinds. The steady rhythm of monitors beeped softly beside her. Her little fingers curled around her stuffed bunny, the one that had stayed with her through every hospital night. Rena was asleep in the chair beside the bed, her hand still holding Ellie's. When she felt the faint squeeze, she stirred and looked up instantly. "Ellie," she whispered, brushing the girl's hair back. "You're awake." The child nodded weakly, her eyes hazy but warm. "Mommy," she said, voice hoarse. "Where's the man?" Rena blinked. "What man, sweetie?" "The man with the paper birds," Ellie whispered. "He was here. He held my hand. He had a big coat." Rena swallowed hard. "I had a dream," Ellie said. "He was holding an umbrella. I was standing in the rain. He put it over me and said I'd be okay." Rena couldn't speak. She just pulled Ellie gently into her arms and held her close. That afternoon, when Ellie had fallen back asleep, Rena walked down 2 floors to the recovery ward. She hadn't visited Tobias since the transplant. Part of her was afraid to see him. Part of her wasn't sure what she would say. But when she opened the door to his private room, her breath caught. He was lying on the bed, asleep, his face pale and drawn. A thin IV tube ran to his arm. The monitors hummed softly beside him. And beside the bed, carefully placed inside a small clear box, were her shoes. The worn, broken pair she had worn that night in the rain. They had been cleaned, the soles mended. A delicate label rested inside the box. "The night we met." Rena stepped forward slowly, her hands trembling. He stirred as she reached the side of the bed. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. Then he saw her. "Rena," he whispered, voice rough. "You kept them," she said softly, glancing at the shoes. "I could not throw them away," Tobias replied. "They reminded me of what I should have seen sooner." She sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the bed. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I can't fix everything I ruined, but I want to try. I want to start with her." Rena's throat tightened. "You already did," she said. "You saved her." They sat in silence for a while. The kind that was no longer heavy, just still. Then, slowly, Rena reached out and took his hand. It was the first time. She felt the warmth of his skin, the strength still in his fingers despite all he had given away. Tobias looked at her, surprised, but he did not speak. And then came her voice, steady and quiet. "Ellie needs you," she said. She hesitated for half a second. then looked directly into his eyes. "And so do I." In that moment, the rain that had haunted both of them for so long finally began to lift. 1 year later, the world looked different. The cafe sat on the corner of a quiet Brooklyn street, its front windows framed with hanging plants and handwritten chalkboard signs. Inside, the smell of warm bread and cinnamon filled the air. The place was small, humble, just a few tables, a counter, and a pastry case, but it pulsed with life. Behind the counter, Rena moved with quiet confidence. Her golden hair was tied up in a loose bun, her apron dusted with flour. She greeted customers by name, poured coffee with a smile, and checked on the oven every few minutes with a proud gleam in her eyes. Above the register hung a small plaque, "Lila's Corner, in memory, in hope." The cafe had been her dream once, tucked away behind survival, buried beneath fear. Now it was real. Funded by the newly re-established Lila Foundation, supported by community grants, but more than anything, powered by her own hands. Outside the large front window, a tiny pink backpack bounced up and down as Ellie skipped down the sidewalk. She burst through the front door in her new pink dress, her cheeks rosy from the cold, her pigtails slightly uneven. "Mommy, guess what?" she shouted. "We made hula hoops out of pool noodles today." Rena leaned over the counter and smiled. "That sounds messy." "It was," Ellie giggled. "And fun." Tobias walked in behind her, carrying a small stack of children's books and a box of paper. He was dressed casually now, no suits, no ties. Just a light sweater and jeans, his black hair tousled from the wind. "Hey," he said, kissing Rena gently on the cheek. "Guess who made the best paper crane in class today?" Ellie threw her hands in the air. "Me." "You've got some competition," he teased. "I'm getting better." He placed the books on the side table near the window, where a little reading nook had been set up, just for her. Every day after preschool, Ellie spent an hour there, reading stories or learning to fold paper animals under Tobias's patient guidance. It had become their routine, their rhythm, their life. As customers came and went, Tobias stayed to help. He cleaned tables, refilled sugar jars, charmed the elderly couple who always asked about that sweet little girl. In the early afternoon, the cafe emptied out. Sunlight slanted through the windows, catching dust in the air like gold. "Come here," Tobias said, kneeling down. Rena raised an eyebrow as he held something behind his back. "What are you doing?" He pulled out a pair of shoes, simple, white leather, elegant without being flashy. "For you," he said. Rena laughed softly. "Tobias." "Try them on," he said, his voice tender. "They're your size." She hesitated, then sat down on the bench by the window. He knelt in front of her and gently lifted one foot, slipping the shoe on with care. Then the other. He tied the laces neatly, his fingers moving slowly, reverently. When he looked up, their eyes met. "You won't be barefoot ever again," he said. Rena blinked back tears. "Not with you around." They sat together as Ellie came to climb into their laps, wrapping her arms around both of them. Outside, rain had begun to fall, soft, steady drops against the glass. But inside, it was warm, filled with the scent of pastries, the laughter of a child, the hush of peace long overdue. The three of them sat by the window, Rena, Tobias, and Ellie, watching the rain fall on a city that no longer seemed so cold. And this time, no one was alone. Thank you for joining us for this soul-stirring journey. If this story touched your heart even just a little, we invite you to become part of our growing family. Hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to tap the hype button to show your love and support for the Soul Stirring Stories channel. We create stories that heal, that remind us of the power of compassion, and that prove even the smallest act of kindness can change a life. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never stop believing in second chances. This is Soul Stirring Stories, where every story touches a soul.